Yes, hello, you're watching the Sunday Politics for Yorkshire and Lincolnshire. Coming up today, we investigate why some of our local councils are spending millions buying regeneration sites which are already owned by the public sector. And we'll be finding out why in some areas children with special needs account for 2/3 of school exclusions. Our guests today are Hilary Benn, the Shadow Local Government Secretary and Labour MP for Leeds Central, Nigel Adams, the Conservative MP for Selby and Ainsty, and David Ward, the Liberal Democrat MP for Bradford East. So we've had the Coalition's mid-term audit this week. Marks out of 10 on the Coalition's progress so far. Hilary Benn.
Well, the presentation was a bit of a shambles, wasn't it? Because we discovered that there were lots of bits that they didn't want to publish because someone was unfortunately photographed carrying the details walking up Downing Street. Look, I think it failed the Ronseal test because the Coalition has not done what it said on the tin it would do. The economy's in real trouble and it said it was going to fix it. So I think it's not really achieved much at all.
I suspect you'll take a different viewpoint, Nigel Adams?
Well, slightly, of course. You know, I do think that we are on the right track. We know we've managed to reduce the deficit by a quarter. There are over 1 million more people back in work. In my own patch, unemployment is down by a quarter since the last election. There's lots more to do, that's clear, but I think we are certainly on the right track.
David Ward, can I press you for a figure? Marks out of 10 so far?
Well, no, because I haven't read it, to be honest. I've been too busy. But it's work in progress. We're not getting there anywhere near fast enough in terms of the economy, and Hillary's absolutely right on that, particularly in terms of growth. I'm much more interested in what's to come, and in particular, I will judge the government on how well it deals with the huge issue of social care and the funding thereof. So judgment deferred.
And you're not going to tell us today that Bradford City only get to Wembley under a Liberal government, are you?
I am absolutely thrilled with this, and I will, of course, take credit for that along within the Coalition government, but really full tribute to the fantastic efforts that have been made there at Bradford City.
We'll talk more in a moment because we're asking, first of all, are taxpayers effectively being forced to pay twice for regeneration sites which are owned by the public sector? A BBC investigation has found that millions of pounds has been spent by local authorities buying up land which used to belong to the now defunct regional development agencies such as Yorkshire Forward. James Vincent has the story.
Barnsley, in the best possible way, it can sometimes look a bit grim. They've been waiting for redevelopment in the town centre for years. Key sites were bought by Yorkshire Forward with public money so that work could go ahead.
Barnsley's had a number of regeneration sites which Yorkshire Forward have been involved in. Out here in the east of the borough, in the Dearne and at Grimethorpe, Junction 36 at the M1, but the principal site and the main site we need for regeneration is right here in the town centre.
So the sites were already publicly owned by one government agency, but after Yorkshire Forward was closed by the Coalition, their land was given to the Homes and Communities Agency, basically another part of the government. So Barnsley Council didn't bank on having to buy them again with £10 million of public money from their budget.
The government simply said, we want a market value. If you're not prepared to pay for it, we'll sell it somewhere else. That would have been a disaster for the scheme.
Councils thought that after the demise of Yorkshire Forward, they might be given these pieces of land, ready to be redeveloped, and then only pay for them when they were successful. That didn't happen, and the money has had to be found up front, much more of a risk. In York, the council has bought part of an old carriage works near the Railway Museum.
Well, I think it's reasonable to assume that land that's owned by the public, which it was through the government, would be passed on still to people and to the public after the demise of regional development agencies. I actually wrote to Vince Cable about this very issue, asking if that land could transfer over to our ownership, and I was written back and told no, and therefore we had to buy the land that we thought was strategically important for York.
The government would say that local councils don't need to own places for them to be successful. This one's owned by the Homes and Communities Agency. It's the Advanced Manufacturing Park on the border of Rotherham and Sheffield. Got Rolls-Royce moving in, diggers in the background, wind turbines working here, hundreds of jobs, and it's seen as the future of South Yorkshire's economy.
And this is another one of those sites, Tower Works in Leeds, run by the Homes and Communities Agency. They say it shows what can be done when they hold on to former Yorkshire Forward assets.
We've just recently opened this refurbished scheme, which has been a highly successful centre for digital and creative media. We've spent something like £5 million in the last 2 years actually completing the refurbishment of this project. When the decision was taken to abolish Yorkshire Forward, we were asked to take on responsibility for these remaining property assets. And some of those assets were sold off where there was no development planned in the immediate future. Other assets we're still working with councils jointly in partnership to bring forward the original schemes. But in some cases, and York and Barnsley and other cases, the local authorities decided they wanted to acquire those assets from us. The Treasury rules were clear that we wouldn't be able to give those assets away for nothing, so they had to be bought at the market value.
Some sites have been bought, others are still on the market. It'll be up to councils whether they want to gamble on taking responsibility for land in their areas. Barnsley hope their purchases will turn into a brand new town centre.
Hilary Benn, if I can come to you first, is it right that Labour councils in Yorkshire are spending millions of pounds buying land that's already publicly owned?
No, it isn't, and I can well understand why Steve Houghton and James Alexander are feeling really cross, because it was public money that bought these assets in the first place, and their budgets are being cut by the government, so they're being hit twice over. But I think the thing that really riles is that when it came to London, Boris Johnson was given the assets of the development agency there for free, whereas in the rest of the country, councils, if they want the land, are having to pay. So it's one rule for London and a different rule for everybody else. That is not fair, is it?
Nigel Adams, surely it's wrong that local authorities have to pay for this land in the current climate, isn't it?
Well, I think a lot of these assets will have been acquired a long time ago, many years ago, and there will, despite what's happened in terms of land and property downturn in recent years, many of those assets will have grown in value. And to effectively give local authorities a handout and effectively say, here, this is a sort of, you've won the lottery by getting these property. Questions would be asked of Treasury. In my own patch, it's not just Labour councils, Hilary. In my own patch, there was a Yorkshire Forward owned asset which transferred to the HCA, and the local council, Selby Council, is bidding to purchase some of the land for what they want to do with it. But they're also going to get a grant from central government to acquire it.
David Ward, this must leave a bitter taste in many taxpayers' mouths, mustn't it? Because they're saying, why are my council tax money, why is that going to land which has already been paid for?
Well, it's different sets of taxpayers, but I think Hilary's point about London is valid, but this is not straightforward. Many of these so-called assets, of course, have a negative asset value. They were bought for regeneration purposes. I'm sure some authorities would not like the transfer of assets to them which had a negative value. You showed a clip there of the Odeon, which is being offered to Bradford Council for £1 plus £100,000, plus it's had over £1 million of HCA funding on it. So I think it's a question of consistency and approach that we're looking for without an appearance that some are gaining and some are losing.
But Hilary Benn, many regeneration projects have gone ahead, haven't they, without the local authority buying up these assets? I mean, the Tower Works project in Leeds, for example, in your own backyard is one example. So why do other councils feel the need to buy these assets?
Well, because they're different developments we're talking about, and in the end, local authorities make that judgment. The best developments take place in partnership, but in some cases the local authority owns the land. And I just think it's wrong that they get charged. And Nigel, why was one rule applied for Boris Johnson and a different rule for us? That can't be right, can it?
I certainly can't answer for London, but I'm sure we'd be getting lots of questions if these valuable assets, in lots of cases, were transferred and nothing went back into Treasury coffers.
I mean, doesn't this show the problem that we don't have a regional organisation now looking after regeneration like we did with Yorkshire Forward and the other regional development agencies? Doesn't that show that actually now there's less of a joined-up picture out there?
Well, there's lots of very good work being done on a local level rather than a regional level now through the local enterprise partnerships. I've met with our local enterprise partnerships on several occasions, and they are doing good work. They are joined up. They're getting their teeth into the job. They're getting their feet under the table, and there's some very exciting plans that they have in certainly my part of the world and rest of.
But on a place like Bradford, I mean, there's still a lot of work to do in your city, isn't there?
Well, there certainly is. We're all aware of the much-needed Westfield development, but don't forget we managed to get £17.6 million of regional growth funding to support the city centre development, so it's not as if it's not receiving some resources.
Let's move on now, because we've claimed that some schools are adopting illegal tactics to keep challenging children out of their classrooms. It's prompted accusations of elitism in some cases, with difficult pupils being excluded from classrooms in order to improve school performance targets. In Lincolnshire, it's been revealed that almost 2/3 of children expelled from the county schools have special educational needs. Sharon Edwards reports.
They're supposed to be open to all, irrespective of family background or ability. But are some schools choosing who they educate and who they don't? There's new evidence that vulnerable children are having a tough time in Lincolnshire schools. A Lincolnshire County Council inquiry has found that of all the children expelled in the last academic year, 65% had some form of special educational need. There's also evidence of illegal expulsions and some children even being denied admittance into schools in the first place.
Firstly, the vast majority of children are faring very well. However, a small number of education providers are playing with the rules. They are unofficially excluding children. Parents are told to collect their children at lunchtime, for instance. They're then sent home, given homework for a couple of weeks. They're kept out of the class system, and that's totally wrong.
Children with special educational needs are by far the most vulnerable to illegal tactics, such as interviewing parents and trying to discourage them from applying, and informal expulsions involving cooling off periods at home and only teaching a child for part of the school day. This mother from Lincoln has 4 children, including one who has special educational needs. When the family moved, he started attending a mainstream school. Her identity has not been revealed to protect her son.
I told the school about his problems and they said that was fine. He gets disruptive and doesn't like change, but he settled at his previous school and was okay.
The 5-year-old is awaiting a diagnosis of autism and is on the special needs register. He was given one-to-one tuition, but after a month he was expelled, says his mum.
They kept saying he was being disruptive and they'd done all they could. How can they say that after less than 4 weeks? How can they claim they had given it time to work?
The school declined to be interviewed, but says it hasn't expelled any child with a diagnosis of autism recently. This Lincolnshire head teacher gave evidence at the council inquiry. He accepts all pupils but says schools feel pressurised to show good exam results.
For whatever reason, if it looks as though the student isn't going to be very successful in their exams because maybe they've had behavioural problems in the past, maybe they've got educational needs which means they find it difficult to learn, that will affect our statistics that we're judged on. We shouldn't be thinking that. We should be thinking, how can I best support this child if they come to our school?
A special educational needs child in England is 8 times more likely to be permanently excluded than any of their contemporaries. The Children's Commissioner is so concerned about that she's conducting her own inquiry. But at the same time, the independent appeal system surrounding expulsions has been weakened, meaning schools can no longer be compelled to reinstate a pupil. Some people also believe that the academy's system has weakened accountability. This report relates to both state-controlled schools and academies which are outside local authority control. This week, the Academies Commission accused some UK academies of covertly selecting pupils. Now schools are under notice, break the rules and face the consequences.
Nigel Adams, the accusation here is that some schools and academies have an elitist agenda. Can that ever be justified?
Well, I'm no fan of overbearing targets, which was referred to in the piece there. I don't have any academies currently in my constituency, but children with special educational needs should, in any school, it should be absolutely essential that they are dealt with properly if they've got special care requirements. They certainly shouldn't be. Those figures of 65% are quite worrying. You know, the fact that we have these sort of numbers in Lincolnshire, would certainly alarm me. I think it's the situation is the guidance that was given back in September was that academies had to adhere to the same exclusion policies as maintained schools and pupil referral units. And I know within the Children and Families draft bill, that is something that's currently been debated and looked at by the Education Select Committee.
Hilary Benn, how widespread do you fear this practice is of schools and academies using effectively illegal selection processes?
Well, it's a very worrying report, and as we just heard, Maggie Atkinson, who's the Children Commissioner, is looking into this because she spoke not too long ago about this very same problem and said that she had had reports made to her of schools sending children home for the afternoon, go away for a week or whatever, and this can't be right. Plus the fact, as we've also just heard, that the appeals system has changed, and that may make it more difficult for parents of children who've got special needs to challenge an exclusion if they think it is unfair. Now, there is a lot of pressure on schools, that is true, but there's no justification for acting illegally, and there has to be accountability for all schools.
So how worried should we be from that statistic that children with special educational needs are 8 times more likely to be excluded from school?
Well, my response is surprise, surprise. You know, I oppose academies under Labour, I oppose the academies and free schools under this government. If you have a system that determines the success of a school based upon attainment, this is what is going to happen. I was a governor for 30 years, and I believe any school, failing school, can be turned around, but it's a hard slog, teaching, learning, management, leadership. How much easier it is to just manipulate the intake to the school and get a rapid increase in performance and say, aren't we wonderful? The Education Select Committee, which I sit on, is very disturbed about how we judge the performance of schools, and a single determinant, the attainment levels, is simply distorting the behaviour really of teachers within schools.
So what happens to the kids that just get kicked further down the system? You know, what happens to the schools where they end up?
Well, it shouldn't be happening. You know, the idea that these children are being excluded specifically because of their lack of attainment is absolutely ridiculous. There are measures currently. I talked about the draft bill that the Select Committee is looking at, but under the funding agreement to deal with academies, and this, I'm not sure whether any of these measures have been used in Lincolnshire, but we certainly shouldn't be having a situation where children, through their perceived lack of attainment, are being excluded from schools. It's scandalous.
Just briefly, Hilary Benn, do you think this is one of the flaws of the Academy's process?
Well, all schools have got to be accountable, and first of all, we need information so we know what's going on. Secondly, we did bring in the value-added measure, because David is right. If you just look at the raw scores, if you look at the raw scores, then you don't get a sense of the progress that schools do make with children who have got special needs. But we need to know what's going on, and all schools, whether academies or not, need to be accountable for what they're doing.
Interesting talking point. Let's get some more of the week's political news in our part of the world now. Len Tingle has our roundup in 60 seconds.
The vote on the controversial 1% cap on increases to benefits was the big political story of the week.
The ayes to the right.
It emerged that 2 Lib Dem MPs, including Bradford's David Ward, voted against the move.
We're talking about hundreds of victims.
A House of Commons committee discussed the failure of social workers to tackle the grooming and sexual exploitation of young girls. It heard this from the Chief Executive of Rotherham Council.
I would certainly apologise to young people and families where they have been let down.
Meanwhile, the Jimmy Savile scandal continues. A police investigation confirmed he was involved in over 200 sexual assaults and should have been prosecuted. The Archbishop of York has backed keeping children's heart surgery in the region. Dr John Sentamu says he can't understand the logic of plans to stop operations in Leeds and send sick children to Newcastle or Liverpool.
So we've had the Jimmy Savile report. I suppose I should ask you as a Leeds MP, Hilary Benn, could another Savile slip so spectacularly through the net?
Well, I sincerely hope not. I mean, with each passing revelation, this becomes more and more appalling. And what is clear is that young people need to be able to speak out, and adults need to take what they've got to say seriously. I mean, that was the lesson from what happened in some of the other authorities. And it's about changing attitudes and then listening to that evidence, and if people have broken the law, pursuing them.
Let's just talk about the vote on the 1% cap on working age benefits. David Ward, tell us why you rebelled.
Well, don't dress this up as a 1% cap. This is a reduction in benefits for the most vulnerable. It is a reduction in benefits for people who are unemployed, a reduction in tax credits to the lowest people on the lowest incomes. Let's not dress this up as an uprating of any kind. This is a proposed reduction in benefits to some of the most vulnerable people in our society.
Nigel Adams, do you admire David Ward's principled stand?
Well, of course I admire anybody with principles, but I don't agree with his point. You know, I think what we've seen in Yorkshire over the last 5 years is people's wages, both in the public sector and in the private sector.
But they have jobs, Nigel.
Well, let me finish. These wages have gone up by about 10.7% across Yorkshire. Yet what we've seen is that out of work benefits have gone up by 20%. And I think this is an issue of fairness. You referred to that, and I know from the people I talk to, and I think I read a recent national poll, that this policy was supported by over 80% of the population. Nobody likes making tough decisions. You know, it's a shame we had to make these tough decisions, but I think it's a case of fairness.
But you haven't made a tough decision, Nigel. For somebody on GSA, this is going to mean an increase of about 71 pence a week. There's a huge difference between someone who is reliant on benefits, they're looking for work, and someone who is working. David's absolutely right. But secondly, why are you doing this at the same time as giving those who earn the highest amount of money a tax cut from April? People simply do not understand it. Because if you're going to take tough decisions, they've got to be fair ones. And what you're doing is profoundly unfair.
Well, I totally disagree with you. Can I just deal with this, the people who earn the most money? You've been in politics an awful long time. You will recognise a scam and a con when you see it. You brought in this 50% tax band days before the last general election. Gordon Brown will have known he wasn't going to be Prime Minister after that election, and whoever was going to come along, you've set this trap. It's an absolute nonsense. And also, a tax increase is supposed to raise money. That increase has actually lost the Treasury £7 billion.
The assumption behind this is that people who are in employment somehow think it's unfair that they're only getting 1%, and people on benefits. People who are in employment are thinking, thank God I am not unemployed. They don't say this is unfair, they say, thank God it's not me.
But Hilary Benn, aren't you in danger of falling on the wrong side of public opinion? I mean, how do you justify to working people that you're giving people on benefits more than what they're getting in increasing in wages?
But they're not getting more because people pay for their food bills and pay the gas bill, not in percentages, but in pounds. And the fact is, if you're on benefits, you've got a lot less coming in. That's the first thing. And secondly, what's been revealed over the last 2 or 3 weeks is that over 2/3 of the people who are going to be hit by this are people who are in work. That's why we've called it the tax on strivers. And the fact is, this isn't just about people who are trying to find a job. It's also going to hit teachers and nurses and members of our armed forces, and that isn't right either.
Well, I suspect we can talk about this all day. More to come at some stage, no doubt. But thank you all for your time today. Hilary Benn, Nigel Adams, David Ward. And now back to Andrew Neil in London.